of the Catholic Church has waded into the Israel-Gaza war in the Middle East. Pope Francis yesterday waded into the ongoing attacks and violence in Israel and Gaza, saying enough to the killings that had claimed children and women, among others. Francis, who called on humanitarian corridors to allow the delivery of essentials to the Gaza Strip, which is under heavy Israeli bombardment following a bloody attack by its rulers, Hamas, insisted humanitarian laws must be respected in the midst of the fighting. Reports, however, claimed conditions in Gaza hospitals were so critical that health workers had begun to store bodies in ice cream freezer trucks because moving them to hospitals has become too risky, even as cemeteries were reportedly full. This was as the Israeli forces were last night readying for a ground invasion of Gaza. Catholics also prayed for peace at a mass celebrated in Jerusalem.
I continue to follow with great sorrow what is happening in Israel and Palestine. I think again of the many, in particular of the children and the elderly. I renew my appeal to free the hostages, and I strongly urge that children, the sick, the elderly, women and all civilians should not fall victim to the conflict. Brothers and sisters, there have already been so many deaths. Please let's not shed any more innocent blood. Not in the Holy Land, not in Ukraine, not anywhere else. Enough is enough. War is always a defeat. Always. Prayer is the meek and holy force to oppose the diabolical force of hatred, terrorism and war.
Basta. Le guerre sono sempre una sconfitta. Sempre.
Well, you know, we in this country, we have always lived in peace. Christians, Muslims, and Jews. We have friends on all sides, in all fronts. We have always lived in peace together. But, you know, sometimes things happen and things might go out of control sometimes, and that's what happened recently. So we came here to church today especially to pray for peace and to look for a better future for everybody living in this country. We really hope that one day we will see peace. We have lived all our lives in wars, in revolutions and intifadas and things like that, and that's really not good for us, and we see no future for us, for our children, for the people in the country, for all the people, not only Christians, Muslims and Jews as well. Indian population. We Palestinians, there have been always Christians, Muslims and even Jewish Palestinian Jews who were born in Palestine before the creation of the State of Israel, and what's happening is really terrible for all of us. We don't feel that we are caught in the middle. We feel that we are part of the population, and we pray for peace. That's the most important thing. We pray for peace, and we hope that we one day will have the peace.
For more on the conflict in the Middle East, we now join Arise chief correspondent, John Cookson in Tel Aviv, Israel. Good morning, John. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Great to be on the morning show.
Thanks for joining us. Now, John, the report so far says about 4,000 people have been killed in this war, 2,670 on the Hamas's side, the Palestinian side, whilst over 1,000 have been killed, 1,400 in Israel. Also, the number of injured has surpassed 10,000 currently, and 155 hostages held by Hamas. The Pope has said that even during the time of war, the rules of engagement in war should be respected. What's the overview in terms of how that has been abided by, especially on the side of Israel invading, Gaza in a matter of hours or days, perhaps? What's the situation in terms of that?
Well, the situation on the ground is it's still very grim in Gaza at the moment. The developing story at this hour is whether the Egyptians and Israelis are going to open up the Rafah crossing. And I've seen live images of people waiting, Palestinians with foreign passports, to get out of Gaza through the Rafah crossing, and for aid to get in, desperately needed aid. Trucks have been queuing up on the border for days now. They're full of food, medical supplies, and other things that are desperately needed in Gaza. So that's a developing story. As for the rules of war, well, Israel has been warned many times by Western leaders to follow international law. I mean, there are laws that everyone in the, if you like, the civilized world accepts, that civilians shouldn't be directly targeted. And of course, that's difficult for Israel at the moment because Gaza is a city, a compact city, a crowded city, what's left of it now. And, you know, if you drop a rocket or a drone strike on a building, the so-called collateral damage is absolutely huge, and civilians have no doubt being killed because of this in their thousands, and it's really a desperate situation. But Israel then would say, well, they want to smash Hamas. Hamas hide in hospitals. They keep their weaponry in schools, in UN, allegedly in UN buildings, and the Israelis say, well, we can't have it both ways. They either eliminate Hamas in an urban area, or they let Hamas run riot. And this is the difficulty that the Israelis face at the present time. President Biden has spoken on a 60 Minutes interview on CBS television last night, urging Israel to be in restraint in any attack. And also he said that occupying Gaza would be something that the US would not support. However, the reality on the ground may prove to be different. Israel poised at this moment to launch a ground assault into Gaza, and really we're in uncharted territory here. We just don't know how things are going to pan out.
Well, John, a lot of shuttle diplomacy going on. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been to Saudi Arabia. He's also going to be in Israel today for the second time. Prime Minister Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, met with King Abdullah of Jordan yesterday. Blinken is also calling on China to intervene. You just mentioned President Biden. But the Israelis are saying, look, there's no other option. They will demolish Gaza. So is there any hope for all these interventions from the Pope to President Biden, to Blinken, to Prime Minister Sunak? Is there any hope?
I'm afraid to say not. I think the Israelis will do it their own way. The Israelis will say, you don't live in this tough neighborhood. What happened on October the 7th, when 1,300 Israelis were slaughtered, they were butchered by Hamas militants, is seared into the minds of every Israeli. And revenge is what the Israeli people want, or most of them do. There are dissenting voices here in Israel. On the diplomatic front, yes, Blinken arrives back here in Tel Aviv at around midday local time, 10 o'clock Nigerian time, having made a visit to 6 Arab states. And what he's hoped to do is to sort of galvanize opinion into one theme. In other words, that civilians will be protected, and possibly some breakthrough on the release of hostages. Now, the difficulty all of those states have, and Blinken too, and Israel, is that there's Hamas, but within Hamas are various factions, and different factions are holding different hostages. So negotiations, probably including millions of dollars even, have to be negotiated with each individual group. So the prospect of hostages being released at this present time isn't high. But Blinken, no doubt, will, when he arrives back in Israel for the second time in 3 days, he may have some news on that. So the diplomatic efforts are ongoing all over the world, including, as you rightly said, China is offering to mediate. But when it comes down to it, Israel will always do what is in Israel's best interests. And Israel at the moment wants to smash Hamas, and sorry to say, people on both sides, that's Israelis and Palestinians, are going to die, unfortunately, in the coming days.
So the other problem is the factionalization of the groups, even in Hamas. Mohammed Deif has been mentioned. They want him for the commando attacks here. But there are also other Hamas leaders that are out there enjoying the splendor and the luxury that Qatar has to offer. That's another part. The question will be, who should the Israelis be talking to now to be able to start the release of those hostages? And would it be like another case of Gilad Shalit, that one Israeli prisoner after 5 years was released for over 1,027 Palestinian prisoners? Would that also be the case this time?
There'll be negotiations along those lines for sure. I mean, the Ismail Haniyeh, as you say, the leader of Hamas, lives in Qatar in some splendor, I have to say. And there will be back channels that Israel can use to negotiate something possibly with him and the factions that I was talking about. The other point to mention is that Israel has had some success in taking out at least 3 senior Hamas commanders in the last 2 or 3 days. The last one was Bilal al-Qadra, who was a senior figure within Hamas. He was targeted with a drone strike by the Israelis and assassinated. And until the ground offensive gets underway, I'm sure the Israelis will continue in their hunt for Hamas fighter senior commanders in Gaza. So that's the situation that we have at the moment in regard to negotiations. Blinken, of course, has been to Qatar. Maybe he's coming back with some kind of offer from the Hamas leader there. We just don't know. So more will come available when Blinken gets back to Israel later today.
All right, John, you talked about the fact that in these attacks, sadly, the reality is that people on both sides are going to die, and these people include civilians. The Pope had called for, as you during the report, a respect of, the rules of law. President Biden had called the same. A number of people have talked about that. Now, earlier in the week, Israeli officials had not been very comfortable, perhaps, with the Vatican's stance, as they felt it ought to have been stronger in terms of speaking in support of Israel. Would you consider the last message by the Pope sufficient? Because he didn't quite still take sides. He was more concerned about the humanitarian effect of this war on both sides.
I'm sure the Israeli leadership takes what the Pope says extremely seriously and will listen to him. But again, I'm sure the Netanyahu regime would repeat that you're not here, your pontiff. The reality on the ground is that Hamas rockets are still landing in Israel. We had that atrocity on October the 7th. Israel is about to start a ground war into Gaza. And although what the Pope says will be taken very seriously, as I said before, Israel will do what it has to do in this situation, and frankly, we're all holding our breath at the moment to see what happens in the coming 48 hours.
Well, thank you very much for your report this morning, John. We look forward to hearing more in terms of updates from both Israel, Hamas, and of course on the Palestinian people.